Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Joining us right now, our favorite doctor, Dr. John Gartner, founder of Duty to Warn, a psychologist, co-host of the podcast Shrinking Trump. Dr. Gartner, nice to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, it's really good to see you again.
So you were on in June. This is our July, August, September 4-month check-in. It's like
4 month
a
checkup.
checkup. Like every now and it's funny. The older I get, I don't go to a doctor to get healed anymore. I start a new relationship. Every doctor I go to, it's like you go and like I want to see you again in 6 months. I'm like, but I'm fine. No, I have to see you again. So this is what it's like with you. I'm applying my standards of
Yeah.
life to you. So
Well, I hope your checkups with your doctor aren't as alarming as your checkups with me.
no, they're actually pretty good, actually. I mean, that's the thing. It's all, look, as you get older, it's all the red flags, and it's relevant to our discussion from your family history, right? So like diabetes runs in my family. So I'd be very aware of my blood sugar, and they check
Sure.
that. And as you get older, they want to check it more frequently. And I'm fine with that because I don't want diabetes. And that. So another thing's heart disease in my family, which again, because dementia and mental health issues often are also related to family. And with Donald Trump, we know from his brother
They
and
run in his family.
had them both,
Right.
Marion and our brother Fred, who said the grandfather had it, the sister had it before she passed away, a cousin had it, and that's real life. So you were on in June, you were raising some red flags about Donald
Yeah.
Trump. That in the first 6 months, certain things came to your attention. What can you? It's hard to maybe you can compartmentalize this, but like
Sure.
from where were we 6 months ago? Then we'll get to what we've
Right.
seen over the summer.
Well, I want to say that when I met with you 6 months ago, I said, take a look at Donald Trump right now, because that is the best Donald Trump you are ever going to see, because dementia is a deteriorating illness. The rock only rolls in one direction, it rolls downhill. Well, here we are 6 months later, and the rock has rolled downhill. Now, that doesn't make me Nostradamus. Okay, it's 100% probability that if somebody has dementia, in 6 months, they will have gotten worse.
And you've talked to many other doctors, being one yourself, but also on your podcast. Is there a consensus? I mean, can you say with a degree of confidence, a reasonable degree of medical certainty, when I used to be a lawyer and would depose people? But I mean, honestly, can you say with a consensus, or is it universal, that he has cognitive decline since he came into office, and that actually you could do a diagnosis of dementia?
Absolutely. You know, we've had a number of guests who have confirmed it, but also at one point we actually put out a petition and we got hundreds and hundreds, actually thousands of signatures, but we had hundreds of mental health professionals. It was just for mental health professionals. I'm trying to remember how many thousand signatures we had at the end, but some of them were people who specialized in dementia, neurologists, neuropsychologists, people who know more than I do about organic brain decline and disease. And they were all charting the same thing. They're all basically echoing the same thing. It's not subtle. You know, what we're seeing is not subtle. And what actually I think is more absurd is as it becomes more and more extreme, the level of, emperor's new clothes denial that's going on, where you
Right.
don't even hear about it on the news. Yet at the same time, it's right there before our eyes, especially if you watch the more unedited, right, versions of his public appearances. But just so people understand, with dementia, we look at a deterioration from someone's baseline of functioning. So, we have to see a gross deterioration from where they were before. A lot of people don't realize, but if you look at clips of Trump speaking in the 80s, he was highly articulate and polished and would actually speak in formed paragraphs. Now he can barely finish a sentence. Sometimes he can't finish a word, those phonemic paraphases we've been talking about. And he certainly can't finish an idea. He's meandering in these tangential ways that we see in people with dementia. And now he's also starting to show a more severe symptom, which is confabulation. We know that Donald Trump is a liar, right? So he says, his poll numbers are through the roof and the economy is going great and we're adding jobs and the price of eggs is going down. Okay, all those things are lies. So we've gotten used to his lying. Confabulation is something that people with dementia do. They're not intentionally lying. They have gaps in their memory. And so they start to tell stories about things that they think happened, but really what they're doing is piecing together little bits of memories. They're gumming them together, weaving them, if you will. So, for example, when he told this story about the Unabomber being in his uncle's class at MIT. And he went on to say, he spoke with his uncle about him and what kind of student was he? Oh, he was very bright, but he was always, correcting the other students and they didn't like that. Well, as it turns out, the Unabomber didn't go to MIT. He went to Harvard.
Right,
So he
right.
couldn't have been in John Trump's class. And by the time he was revealed as a Unabomber, John Trump was dead, Trump's uncle. So, but the thing is that as you watch the tape of him conversationally talking about this memory, this isn't something that advantages him. It's not like saying the
Right.
poll numbers are up when the poll numbers are down. This is just a kind of a neutral story that doesn't particularly make him look good or bad. It's just like a memory, an anecdote that absolutely didn't happen. And this is the kind of thing that's happening more and more. And this is what people recognize with people with dementia.
And I'm chatting with Dr. John Gartner. I thought of you on Friday when I played a clip, and I was trying to be fair with the audience about it. Donald Trump was asked 2 days after Charlie Kirk, who was a good friend of his, died, and I'll read it.
Right.
The report says, "My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. How are you holding up?" And he's standing there by the helicopter, and he goes, "I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks. They just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get for about 150 years. It's going to be a beauty, an absolutely magnificent structure." And I'm like, how do you go from your friend dying to talking about the trucks? And he saw the trucks, and like a shiny object, it just distracted
Yes.
him. Or is there
Right.
something going on? What did you take from that?
Well, actually, there's two parts to it. One is the truth is Donald Trump doesn't give a hoot about any other human being. So there is actually nobody who could be killed who he would actually care. So he's holding up fine. Thank you
Right.
very much, because he doesn't care. But you picked up on something else, which is he just sort of sees something and he just starts meandering about it, free associating. He did this with like grass. Remember, we were talking about the grass, and I know everything about grass. Grass has a shelf life. It lives, it dies. Well, I know no one knows more about grass. And he just went on and on about this irrelevant sort of topic. This is the thing we're starting to see him do more of. He did it with the showers and water pressure. And, he's starting to just talk about something that really is not related to anything. It's not related to the question. It's not related to some pressing issue. It's sort of like a free association of some
Right.
thought that just came to his mind, or as you say, an object he just saw. And he just starts kind of talking about it in this sort of meandering kind of way. Again, if anyone's ever had a relative with dementia, this is very familiar to you.
And is it also because there are people who will say, well, there are times he makes a lot of sense. And that's true. There are moments that he's lucid. And is it
Exactly.
also consistent with the normal sort of as you evolve or deconstruct in terms of dementia and brain function?
Well, if any of you listening in the audience have ever had a relative with dementia, then they have good days and bad days. That's a cliche for a reason. And
Right.
sometimes it varies within a day, and sometimes some times of day are worse. We found that Trump seemed to be worse in the evening, which dementia patients tend to do. This the whole sundowning concept. So during the election, we noticed they started scheduling events earlier and earlier. So he was having 1 in the afternoon rallies instead of evening rallies because he would become more disorganized in the evening.
What about we've seen Donald Trump now with this right hand, and I know you're not that kind of doctor, but I
Right,
see him
right.
like when he did the video for Charlie Kirk on Wednesday, he was clutching his right hand and hiding it from us. And it
Yeah.
could be vanity, or I'm wondering, is there a point where it could be something else? And I just don't know from a mental health point of view.
Well, I think that obviously you can have more than one illness, especially as you get older.
Right.
But there may be a connection because one of the experts who I trusted the most said she was utterly convinced he had frontotemporal dementia, which is a specific type of dementia having to do with a bad circulation and deterioration in the frontal lobes. He seems to have some generic circulatory problem. This chronic venous insufficiency seems to
Yep.
be a euphemism for what might be a more serious problem, perhaps congestive heart failure. That swelling in the ankles is more typical of congestive heart failure. And I think he seems to be having a series of mini strokes. More recently, if you saw him at, I forget what event this was, but
9/11, the
the
9/11
9/11.
event.
Thank you. It was
Yep.
9/11. Half of his face was drooping down.
We
And
all saw
that's
that.
not just, yeah, and that's not a sign of being tired or old. Age or fatigue doesn't make half of your face droop. that really is a sign of a stroke, of a minor stroke, or some kind of neurological issue. And so he may be having a series of little mini strokes, and that may be part of what's causing the diagnostic the mental decline. Or he may have physical health problems as well as chronic neuropsychological problems. They're not, you can, as the former chairman of Hopkins used to say, a dog can have ticks and fleas, so.
You were on in June, earlier in June, and it was within a week or two when Carolyn Levitt, the press secretary, came out and volunteered that Donald Trump had health issues. And I think that because there was a clamoring going on, and then the photos of his ankles being very, very swollen were undeniable. Were you surprised that they came out? They usually are, they're not the least transparent administration I've ever seen.
Well,
Were you surprised that you felt like they had to come out?
I think they had to come out to explain some of what was going on, and I think they came up with the most benign explanation. We know they're not telling us the whole truth. They're not telling us anything about what those bruises are on the back of his hand. They're
Right.
obviously not from handshaking because he has them on both hands. Um, the other physical symptom that people are not paying enough attention to, but the frontotemporal expert is the one that really pointed this out to me. This was about almost a year ago. It was before the election. He has something called what a wide-based gait. You
Mhm.
see it in some clips very profoundly clear, others are not so clear. But a wide base gait is when he kind of swings his foot like it's a dead weight in kind of a semicircle. Um,
Mhm.
and so it creates a kind of weird gait because it's like a step and then a swing, a step and then a swing. And I don't know if you saw that footage where he was walking down the red carpet when he was meeting Putin, and people did a kind of Benny Hill kind of humorous speed up of that, so you could see him zigzagging across the carpet. And you went by speeding it up, you saw how much he was really weaving, like they would pull him over for drunk driving. But when you look at that same footage and slow it down, what you actually see is that it's he's got this on his right leg, this wide base gait, and he kept swinging the leg so far to the left that it was pushing his whole line of direction to the left. So he wasn't just weaving, he was actually kind of swinging himself to the other side. Then he overcompensates and goes all the way to the right side of the carpet and starts to then start moving to the left again. So really, we're starting to see it now, not just on the mental level and the verbal level, which is something that we were able to observe now really for years, and it's been getting worse and worse. And we could give you obviously lots of examples, and we've talked a lot of examples here. But now we're starting to see it at a physical level. And with dementia, you have a deterioration of all functions: language, impulse control, judgment, motor movements. And so also a lot of his impulsive kind of crazy, today we're putting 400% tariffs on, China. Today we're putting, it's like, it feels a little bit like that character in Woody Allen's character in Bananas, where for those of you who are old enough to remember, when he becomes a South American dictator and he starts making crazy, kind of pronouncements. I mean, that some of these things are just impulsive and not thought out in a way that, again, in some ways, his dementia is hiding in plain sight because his personality disorder is so severe, right? So he's already a chronic liar. So how do you know when he's confabulating? He's already impulsive because of the personality disorder. So how do you know when he's getting worse? But he is getting worse. It is more chaotic, and it's going to continue to get worse. And I'm afraid the press is going to continue to ignore it.
And I want to talk about that for a second, but one of the other examples where Donald Trump was promising prescription drug prices are going to come down 1,200%,
Right, right.
1,200%, 1,500%. So they're going to pay us because when you go below
Exactly. I
100%,
know.
you're getting compensated. So the only way it goes down 1,000% is that it's down to zero, and then we're through the negative part, and I'm getting $100 to take your medicine, which would be just great. And like,
Right.
so the lie is he wants to make it sound good, but the brain doesn't grasp the reality of anything
Right,
beyond
exactly. He
100%
could he could
reduction
make
is free.
Right. He could make up he could lie and just make up a number, but he's making up a number that's like an imaginary number, a radical number that doesn't even exist, that couldn't exist, right? That's what you mean about cognitive decline, right? So it's one thing to lie, but you should know that you can't reduce a price more than 100%. I think he recently said, I forget who he was blaming for the murders, if it was the trans people or the left-wing conspiracy, but he said already 300 million people have been murdered. Well, that would be like the whole country, was it?
We're all dead, which might be makes sense. We might be in hell. this might actually be Helen. He was telling the truth there for a second. We never know what's going on. He actually said something truthful. The whole
Dean,
game.
that might be the most plausible explanation I've heard so far.
That we're all living, we live really bad lives, and our punishment is to be subjected to Donald Trump for an inordinate amount of time. I'm talking with Dr. John Gartner. So you mentioned last time we talked about this and the frustration of the corporate media refusing to cover this the way they did with Joe Biden, and that is by putting things together. Like if you cover things in a vacuum, you can say, well, he's a liar, or he got confused, or he was tired. That all could be true. But when you put it all together, it's undeniable.
Right.
What is going on with our corporate media? And is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Do you see any glimmers of hope?
Well, look, they didn't want to report on this story before he became president. Now he has got them so intimidated, right? I mean, with all of his lawsuits, he made all these networks.
DOJ.
Yep. Yeah, DOJ investigations. All these networks are signing settlements, paying millions of dollars for something bad they didn't even do, because it's extortion. Look, he rules by extortion. So he says, nice little network you got here. Shame if anything should happen to it. And so they're handling him with kid gloves. They're normalizing things. They're both anding things. And I just don't think it, I think it really is becoming, last time I was on this show, he said, well, but wait a minute, if he becomes president and he cognitively deteriorates, what's that going to look like for the country? And I said, it might be, like, my weekend at Bernie's White House. I call it my weekend at Donnie's White House now. But really, it's like, at what point in the deterioration are we going to stop with the sort of fiction that we don't notice anything going on? One moment that really caught me, I'm sure you remember this too. This was a couple of months ago, but they asked him some question about, well, people think your, clash with Harvard could be an attack on academic freedom. What do you say about that? And he goes, well, I got most of the black vote in Harlem. And he starts talking about Harlem instead of Harvard. Now, it's just a clang association, Now, at first, I think, well, maybe he misunderstood the word. But no, later on, he goes, and the people in Harlem, they agree with what we're doing in Harvard. So this is the kind of thing. And what was interesting is it was one of these settings where it was on TV and there was like 4 newsmen, and he was on the screen, and you saw the look on their faces when he's talking about Harlem, like, what's going on? What's going on? But no one actually followed up and said, sir, we're not talking about Harlem. We're talking about Harvard. They just accepted his answer and moved on. Asked another question.
I mean, I know you can't read into the mind of the people who work in the cabinet with him or see him every day, but if people see him every day, is there any way for them to escape seeing this decline?
Well, Dean, haven't you seen the cabinet meetings? He's the greatest president who's ever lived. It's a second American Revolution. He deserves the Nobel Prize, and probably should be on Mount Rushmore. And we should rename every civic institution the Donald Trump, public library, whatever it is. I mean, that's another one of the absurdities, right? As they're praising him to the skies, he's actually, deteriorating. As he's garnering power, as he's consolidating more and more power, he's losing more and more of his faculties.
I saw that. And to me, the cabinet meetings sound almost like people trying to get on grandpa's will. Like they're like, he's not going to be with us long. Let's all say really nice things to him. No, I'm going to up you because I want the greenhouse. Like I want the rosebud flower. Whatever it is, I want the car, or like a living wake on another level. I mean, I have to be honest. There's something weird about it. There's something ghoulish about it now, knowing that he's declining. He doesn't look well. They see him hunched over. Remember, he used to walk in a room like he owned it, and now he walks in and he just stands there and he's slouched forward. It's not the same guy. He's
not the same guy.
I also think he's more dangerous though than ever, which is weird because
it is more dangerous than ever.
When my mom got dementia. My mom's Sicilian, 100%. She was very, very difficult. That was part of her pride of being Sicilian. When she got dementia, she actually became nicer to everyone. Weird. Donald is not. It is unleashing an even more viciousness in this man. So what do you think, based on your expertise? Do we continue down that path?
Yes, that's what's happening. Well, actually, what Trump is doing is more typical. typically, if people have a personality disorder or personality issues, they get dramatically worse as they become more demented.
Okay.
Now, but it does kind of bring out people's true personality. I have an uncle that's in the end stages of dementia right now, and he was a lovely man. He taught yoga. He was a past life regression therapist. He was very enlightened sort of guy. And now that he has dementia, he's still very sweet. He says, I just want to say, as far as I'm concerned, you're my wife and I love you. He says to his wife, and he'll repeat the
Right.
same thing over again. We love Woofy, our dog. He says it over and over again, but he's still very, very nice because Donald Trump is essentially a malignant narcissist, right? He's going to become more vicious, but in a more disorganized and impulsive and less well thought out way. But yes, he is becoming worse. And I feel like this cabinet, they're such toadies, right? They're so
Yeah.
afraid of him, right? That I'm afraid that as he deteriorates, originally people saying, oh, well, maybe that means we'll get rid of Trump if he gets demented. And maybe we should hope that he deteriorates as soon as possible. And there's a race between his deterioration and his, massing power. And I kept saying, no, 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 no. We don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want a madman with absolute power who's also becoming demented. I mean, this is the worst of all possible worlds because he's going to make horrible mistakes that are going to really hurt the country. And because he's such a power freak, right, he's not going to surrender power to anyone else as he becomes more disorganized or as he's going to actually exercise power in even more arbitrary and dangerous ways just to show who's boss.
That's an excellent point. And I saw that with my mom sometimes where she felt like you're trying to take advantage of me, these weird moments where she would lash out. She wasn't president. She wasn't commander in chief when she could do that. Are there, for people watching Trump going forward, based on, your work through the years, are there other little red flags? I don't think it's going to be an off the cliff moment. We could get to that, right? You've talked about that and others have talked about, you can have it. But what would be the next things we should be looking out for? And what I mean, for example, is there was that time where he kind of disappeared for a couple of days and
Yeah.
then came back. Are those the kind of things? Are there going to be like, we're only going to see him for less periods of time? Or are there other things that he might say or articulate or move in a certain way where like everyone should go like, okay, folks, we're moving in another direction that's even worse right here.
Well, one of the things I think worth looking at that we didn't mention is he's starting to show more of what I just call the blank face. The thing that really killed Biden the worst in the debates was when he looked like a deer in the headlights. He just looked like he had a blank face.
Hmm.
We have some pictures like that of Trump where he goes like
Yeah, yeah.
with his mouth
The
open,
doctor
kind
has
of
his mouth
gay.
open, and it's like, and I know what you're talking about with President Biden because that was the most jarring thing because people could see them. They go, look, that's like a guy who doesn't really grab what's going on. So,
Exactly.
so you're seeing that more with Trump. I'm going to go look for that more now.
Yeah, yeah. Especially on social media, right? Because social media does a lot of gotcha. But you'll see those little pieces of footage, and we're starting to see them more and more. There was one recently where someone asked a question, and he kind of asked Melania, what the question was. But you could see he was totally disorganized, and he's like, "Have you spoken to Putin about blah 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 blah?" And he goes. Like he says, like asks what the question was, but you can tell he has no idea what was just said. He goes, "Oh yeah, I'm talking to Putin." When
Wow.
she summarized it for him, so keep an eye on that because that's incredibly revealing and incredibly damning.
I mean, we don't know. We can't predict with great certainty, obviously, what will happen. But from what you've seen just in his first 9 months in office, do you think he could be still legally competent in 3+ years from now?
No, I don't think he can make it. I don't think he can make it to the next 4 years, compos mentis and or alive.
So you think that either physically or mentally, in either case, he'll be 80 in a matter of 7 or 8
Right.
months
Right.
now. And
Now the
so you
problem is
based
if
on
he's
your
not
opinion,
compos mentis, and they don't remove him, that's the most terrifying thing. But he will not be compos mentis and alive by the end of 4 years. I just don't think it's possible. Now that I'm not Nostradamus. I can't read, but the
yeah,
rate at which this is progressing, it's getting faster and faster. And from your experience with your mom, right? That's what happens, right? He hasn't fallen off what we call the cognitive cliff yet, where suddenly he's incapable of taking care of himself. But people who are working with him now said he's not the same man he was 4 years ago, right? We're seeing a chronic process of deterioration, and it is accelerating, which is what happens with the course of the illness.
and And when you were saying the term in Latin, that's just mentally competent, just so people know.
Yeah, that's all right.
Wonderful.
Not trying to be fancy here.
No. I think it's important that people know what
Yeah.
these terms mean. Well, doctor, again, I always appreciate the check-ins with you. There's no copay or deductible. So you're my favorite doctor of all. And doctor, people can follow, if you wanted to follow your Shrinking Trump or anything else, where can they go? What do you recommend they go?
So you can find us on YouTube. We're on the Really American channel. We're also on any podcast that you listen to, Apple, Spotify, or what have you.
All right, doctor. Nice seeing you, Dr. We'll see you later in the year or in January. Maybe we'll check in then, see
We'll
where
have
our
another
patient
check.
is. Well,
We'll have
thanks a
another
lot.
checkup, and I can guarantee you one thing: our patient will be worse.
Very much true. I know every day is his best day that you're going to see him, as you told us last time.
Right.
And tomorrow he'll be worse. Thanks, doctor. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Good seeing you too.